it's not as simple for these soft skills. You don't say, well, learn these three things, poof, you're a leader. And Monday morning, you're going to start being a leader. You don't know when you're called on to be a leader. That moment happens spontaneously. You don't know when there's a communication challenge. It's not listed on your calendar. So these one-off, I am sending you to some training and you come back and you've been transformed, that's not how it works.
This is the Rebel HR Podcast. If you're a professional looking for innovative, thought-provoking information in the world of human resources, this is the right podcast for you. Rebel on, HR Rebels. All right, Rebel HR listeners, I am extremely excited for our guest today. Mark Herschberg is the author of The Career Toolkit, Essential Skills for Success That No One Taught You. From tracking criminals and terrorists on the dark web to creating marketplaces and new authentication systems, Mark has spent a career launching and developing new ventures at startups and Fortune 500s and in academia. He currently lives in New York City, and thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Really looking forward to it. We are thrilled, as always, to have Molly Burdess joining us as our esteemed co-host. So, Mark, why don't we start off? Why don't you just tell me what prompted you to write a book about a career toolkit?
Early in my career, I knew I wanted to become a CTO. And that meant not just being the best programmer, but learning a bunch of other skills, learning how to hire people, how to lead, how to manage, how to do budgets, strategy, work with others, all these skills that I had never been taught. So I began to learn on my own. When I started to hire people, I said, well, these are good skills. I want to see these skills in others. But when I would ask someone a question, like what makes someone a good leader, I'd get a blank stare because no one else was taught this either. And so I realized I had to build, not buy, right? I couldn't find people with the skills. I had to train them up. Shortly after I had been doing this, MIT had gotten a lot of feedback from corporations saying, look, your students are really smart, but we want to hire people who aren't just book smart, but have these skills, leadership, communication, networking, negotiations, teamwork. We're not seeing that. So MIT began to develop a program. When I heard about this, I said, I've been working on this for a while. Can I be of help? They said, sure. So I came in, I shared some of what I've been doing. They said, why don't you help us teach? So for the past 20 years, I've been teaching these skills. And the reality is it's not just MIT students who need this. Other colleges got the same feedback. And it's not even college students. As your listeners know, you want to hire people with these skills, but they have not been trained in them. And so that led to all the teaching and now the book.
I think a lot of HR professionals can relate to that for sure. The soft skills are what our candidates are missing.
I would agree with that 100%, Molly. I loved the term that you used, and that was build, not buy. So I think that's one of the things that us in HR, it's really easy to say things like that and say, you give us somebody that has all of these, the motivation to do more and the motivation to learn and listen and teamwork and collaboration. But a lot of times we are stuck trying to figure out, how do I build these type of skills? And I think some of us actually get stuck as we're screening candidates and bringing them into an organization, trying to understand, can we even build some of these skills? So as you're working with these groups and through your multiple years educating, where do you start with that question, and how do you start with kind of just figuring out how do I develop these types of skills that are critical for success?
Great question. And unfortunately, HR has been so hamstrung because every time there's a downturn, where do you cut first? You cut HR, and you cut in particular L&D, and you really just take the legs out from under us. Fortunately, you don't need a lot of money to do this. Now, one, I think, shortcoming that we've seen is traditionally in learning and development, the HR folks go to the CFO and say, okay, give me $10,000. I'm going to pick 10 lucky winners, my 10 superstars, and I'm going to spend $1,000 on them each to go to some leadership seminar or whatever the in vogue training happens to be. Say, well, these 10 people, you go off for a couple days, come back, poof, you're now a leader. And this is unfortunate for a few reasons. You're selecting only a handful of people. It's also done as a one-off. And now, one-off training, traditional training that we've done, where you have some expert stand in front and say, do this, that, and the other thing, that's great for knowledge transfer. That's great for, hey, accountants, you need to learn the new tax laws, right? Or software folks, learn the new technology. Unfortunately, it's not as simple for these soft skills. You don't say, well, learn these three things, poof, you're a leader. And you know Monday morning you're going to start being a leader. You don't know when you're called on to be a leader. That moment happens spontaneously. You don't know when there's a communication challenge. It's not listed on your calendar. So these one-off, I am sending you to some training and you come back and you've been transformed, that's not how it works. There is a technique you can use. This is how we teach at MIT. This is how business schools have been teaching for years, and that's using a peer learning model. What you want to do, and I've got a free download on the website that breaks down how to do this. You form small groups, and you can do this. I'd recommend groups around 5 to 7 people each, but you can do it with larger groups of 20, even 80 people. They just require some slightly different structure. Let's take these small groups of a handful of people, and you give them some topics. And you say, we're going to talk about leadership or communications. And then you discuss it as that group. Because the key thing, it's not knowledge transfer. It's not do these three things and you're suddenly a master communicator. When there's a challenge, the way I might approach it, that's different than how Molly would approach it, different than how Kyle would approach it. And when we have that discussion, I say, wow, Molly, that's a really good point. I never would have thought of it that way. And now we've enriched our understanding of the content. Now, this has a couple advantages. It is low cost, right? All you need is some basic content. We'll talk about content you can use in a moment. It hits everyone, not just those 10 lucky winners, but you can do this across the organization. It increases employee engagement because now everyone is doing this. Maybe it's a half hour or hour every other week or once a month, but everyone feels engaged. It also, because you want teams that are diverse in terms of backgrounds from different departments and groups, you're increasing the internal networking and relationships, which strengthens your organization. So all you need to do is you create these groups, take some content. And yes, on my website, I have a download that also shows, here's how you can use my book. But it doesn't have to be my book. You can use many of the other wonderful books I list, books you're already familiar with. You can use great podcasts like this. You can use topics wherever you get them and say, okay, that's the content. We're going to listen to it, read the article, read the book. But it's that discussion that is so important. And you can do this for very little cost. And now you go from being someone who just asks for money so you can go hire some external trainers to the person who created and runs a world-class learning organization, all at little cost.
It's interesting, but it makes sense. I mean, I hate sitting in a PowerPoint, but I love happy hour after the PowerPoint, and then we all talk about it. And I remember a lot more about the conversation after the training, and ultimately, I guess I didn't even realize that this was occurring, but I can think about a number of great ideas that were prompted by training, but because we had a robust debate afterwards, or a dialogue based upon how that training went, or things we agreed with or didn't agree with, or things that would or wouldn't work within our organization. That kind of that synthesizing that content in the in the environment of that relationship for me. That makes perfect sense. Molly, I know you're passionate about learning and development, and especially leadership development. Does this resonate with you?
It sure does. I completely agree with this model, and I've seen it work. In fact, one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it is because when I first got into HR and was thrown into learning and development, had no idea how to create a training program, how to lead one. Here I was leading it for this 300 plus employee organization, and I fell flat on my face for at least 3 years. It was probably some of my most biggest failures in my career thus far. And as soon as I made that shift from, okay, I'm going to put on a presentation or hire a trainer to train on what I want, I made that shift to exactly what you're talking about. I didn't have a name for it, but now I know it's a peer learning model. It completely changed everything. I mean, I had people coming up to me and saying, wow, that was the best training I've ever done. And I'm like, well, great. I didn't really do anything but facilitated like the content and the discussion. So I 100% agree with this model. I've seen it work. It's fantastic. I completely support it.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And you know, this is being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, you know the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
That's great. So one of the things that I'm curious to dive into a little bit is, I think there's a little bit of a tendency for individuals to think that, by the time I hire somebody, their soft skills are cemented, and their communication skills aren't going to get a whole lot better, even no matter how much training I give them, or or their negotiation or teamwork. It's just, it's already ingrained. So how do you address kind of that approach? And I guess first of all, is that true? And second of all, how do you approach that as you're educating adults on some of these skills that seem to be foundational?
It is absolutely false. All of these skills can be developed and learned at any point in our life, as long as the person is open-minded and saying, I want to develop them. One of my favorite books is The Charisma Myth by Olivia Fox-Caban. Now, charisma is the type of skill where you think, well, you got it or you don't. But in her book, she breaks down what are the components of charisma and explains how you can learn to be more charismatic. Just like you can learn to play golf or program a new software language, it is a learnable skill. And this is true for negotiations, for leadership, for communication. We've seen people get better at public speaking. You can join great groups like Toastmasters. People get MBAs and they learn all these great skills. We know it's learnable. And so having that mindset of, well, you just get what you get, that's going to be very limiting to you and your team. But when you have that open mindset, and when you hire for people with that open mindset, then it's easier to grow. Now, I will note one of the techniques that we use in the class at MIT, and this unfortunately I wasn't able to put into the book, we do a lot of interactive games. So we do case studies, we do role playing, and of course, within your own organization, you can go buy this content, do it yourself. And the way we set up, we pick particular types of modules. We've either bought or designed them. So the students do what they tend to do, which at MIT is take a very analytical approach. And they're going to fail when they focus too much on the analytical approach and not these other pieces. And it's in that moment of failure that people are often receptive to learning. When they say, wait, why did this work? It's worked before for me. And then you say, okay, now they're starting to question, well, here's the secret. Here's how you have to shift your mindset. And in fact, this is key for all of these types of skills. It is a mindset shift, because we know when we teach at MIT and when I write in the book, you're not going to learn this in a day, a week, even a semester. There are people who do PhDs on subtopics of these very broad categories. But if you get that mindset shift, suddenly things change. So let me give you an example. Leadership is something many young folks, their mental model is that leaders are people who have a certain title, director, VP, and therefore by their authority, they are a leader. Now that is authority, that's not leadership. We know that true leadership is influential. Leadership is saying, Here is a vision for the future. Here is something we can do. And then inspiring and convincing other people to go along and follow to that end. Ordering people to do so is not leadership. And so once you shift this model, all these young folks go from thinking, well, I'll be a leader once I turn 30, once I get that promotion and get that title, to I can lead from day one. And it doesn't mean you're instantly a great leader, but if at 22 you say, okay, I can lead even my first day on the job, now you recognize more opportunities to be a leader. You recognize when other people are displaying leadership, and your growth accelerates in a way that wouldn't happen if you thought leadership is not something I face until I hit a certain level. So when you get that mindset shift, you suddenly become more open to developing these skills, and that is so important as we want to teach and develop this across our organization.
So in summary, you can teach an old dog new tricks. That's what I'm hearing.
Absolutely.
So why, I'm curious, MIT sounds like they figured this out. Why are other schools and organizations, why are they not teaching this? Because I do think this is a bigger issue.
When you look back at the history of the university system, it was not designed to teach this. So the university system, for historical reasons, they're run by different departments. A department is controlled by the professors in a department. So you have a whole bunch of accounting professors, and they say, we are the gatekeepers to accounting. We determine whether someone should get a bachelor's of accounting. What happens? Someone takes a certain number of courses, and they say, okay, you've taken this many courses, you've passed these tests. We now authenticate you as having a bachelor's level of knowledge in accounting. That's all they are saying. They're not saying you're a good coworker, a good communicator, a good employee. They're just saying you know this level of knowledge of accounting or chemistry or whatever the field is. That is a necessary but not sufficient condition to be an effective worker. Even when we go back 70, 80 years to mid-century, back then we had these big hierarchical corporations. And so your job was to do what your boss told you. Do this one little focused piece of work that might be accounting or chemistry. And you do that work and hand it to your boss, and he would figure out what to do with it and tell you the next piece to work on. When we flattened the organization sometime around the 80s, 90s, got rid of all that middle management, we went from being the cog in the machine to now these dynamic teams where it wasn't just about doing the technical work. Technical, of course, could mean accounting, marketing, your discipline, but also interacting with others and having this teamwork, this communication, this standing up to be a leader. We had to start doing all of that. But the university system is unfortunately backwards facing, and so didn't adapt to this. I think they will start to adapt. We're starting to see some changes, but it's going to take about 30 or 40 years before they really catch up, unfortunately.
Yeah. I used to work a lot with high school students, and the pushback I always got from other employers or organizations, well, shouldn't the parents be teaching this?
And that is something, when you look at the high school level, if you think back 100, 200 years, you had the working class. Well, your job was to learn a trade, be a plumber or a blacksmith. And then you had the upper class. And those are the people who may have gone to college or held professional jobs back then. They did learn from their family. They learned the society rules. But of course, today, you've got a single parent working 2 jobs. The kids are busy running from violin lessons to soccer lessons to playing video games. We're not giving them that sort of training and engagement that they used to get 100, 200 years ago. So we can't rely on families or society as a whole to really be training these skills, and we have to be more formal and thoughtful in them.
Yeah, and I think I have young children. It truly does take a village to to raise fully functioning human beings, and I get that a lot of the social norms are taught at home, but I also think as an HR professional, you also have a responsibility to integrate people into your organization, help them understand, what skills are required, what kind of values does the organization espouse, and if they don't have those skills, I think one of the challenges is, you have to make a decision whether you're going to invest the time to educate them on improving those skills, or take the approach of you're not a fit, and exiting them from the organization, which unfortunately I think many of us in HR have had to deal with those scenarios as well. So I think one of the really critical aspects of our job is trying to figure out that the question of fit. And you had mentioned something about screening or hiring for open mindset. So how do you measure that, and in what way can you find those types of individuals to join your organization?
I would even go broader. I did give that as an example. Unfortunately, when we hire, we tend to hire for knowledge or experience, but not skills. We want someone with knowledge of this tool, of this domain, so many years experience doing something or else. And that is important, but that's very street lamp effect, right? We can look for that because it's easy to measure. We don't explicitly think about things like communication, leadership, teamwork. One of my big pet peeves I see on lots of job applications, lots of job descriptions, strong communication skills. Okay, that's a good thing to have, but what do you mean by that? Do you mean someone who writes effective emails, who is a good public speaker, who communicates well to their team, who can communicate to other teams with a different background, who can go in front of customers? Any and all of these might be important, but they're probably not all equally important. And at no point did someone say, what do we really need? Is this person, is it important that they can go and speak at conferences? I've definitely had jobs where I said, this is part of the job. We want to make sure you can do that. In other cases, I said, yeah, we don't care if you can do that or not. Make sure you can explain to the rest of the leadership team all these technical challenges, because we don't get it. As a CTO, you have to translate for us. That's what we're looking for. So people just think of these soft skills almost as an afterthought. Yeah, we want a leader. Do you want a transformational leader, a growth leader, a leader who can take a demoralized team and turn them around? These are different types of leadership skills. So we first want to define what we're looking for in these skills. Then to your question, if we're looking for open-mindedness or communication, we want to think about what would demonstrate that. So for communication, I will explicitly think, am I trying to get you to speak in public? Maybe show me a clip. Do I want you to be able to explain technical ideas in a much more simplified manner? I'm going to give you some complicated ideas and say, now explain it to a 12-year-old or explain it to someone who doesn't have your background. Looking for open-mindedness, talk to them about challenges where their particular beliefs or values may have been challenged and how they adapted to that. What was their process? What's their thinking for going through that change? So be very explicit in what you're looking for, and then create questions that will elicit an effective evaluation to that particular metric.
Yeah, I think we can all do a little bit better job of probably defining exactly what we're looking for and then tailor a process to that. As you're talking, I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts are on personality assessments, skill assessments, that can also, per se, help solve some of this, right?
I mentioned this in the book. We use the Herman Brain Dominance instrument at MIT. I will say it's something of an arbitrary choice. And I also say in the book, I know there are people who call Myers-Briggs astrology for the business world. I happen to like these assessments. If you don't like them and don't believe in them, fine, don't use them. If you do like them, they are useful, but understand what the tool is. So with the Herman Brain Dominance instrument, it tells you your preferential thinking modes. Now, this was helpful for me because, well, not surprisingly, I happen to be really quantitative in my thinking. For a guy who has multiple MIT degrees, that's not a really big shocker. I was also disinclined towards the interpersonal quadrant. Also not a big surprise for people who knew me. And I guess on some level I probably knew that, but I saw that and said, this is interesting. It says I avoid thinking in this style. And that was a problem Now, I still have a strong preference for my quantitative thinking mode, but I know that for me in my leadership role, I have to learn to think in multiple modes. And so I had to consciously force myself to look at things from different perspectives. That was very helpful for me. Just as I don't like vegetables, I much prefer ice cream and cookies. And if you put two plates in front of me, I'm going to go for the ice cream and cookies. But as an adult, I know, okay, I do need to eat vegetables. This is important. It's not my preference, but that's okay. And I'm going to train myself to eat my vegetables. Knowing what my preferences are and my disinclinations, I can be more conscious in training up the areas where I'm weak, because your disinclinations cause you to avoid certain areas and lead to weak skills in those areas. So recognize what these things are. They're usually about preferences, not skills. And then recognize in individuals, does this correlate to skill development in areas where you may need to work?
Molly, I am a Taurus, in case you didn't.
I have no idea what that means.
It means I'm hard-headed and opinionated.
Oh, I could have told you that. Yeah, I got that.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's great. I love that. We actually just rolled that out a personality assessment tool at our organization, but the intent was to help with interview screening. First of all, help an interviewer think about questions that may help them uncover some insights to make a better choice. So if somebody, like you said, if somebody's very dominant, the question that might be prompted in the tool would be, tell me about a time when you were more collaborative than you were comfortable with, something like that, just to help guide that conversation, as well as an awareness tool for internal career development. So I love them, but I love that kind of stuff anyway.
So you use them as part of your interview process. So candidate applies and has to take it at that step, and then your interviewer uses that information. It's not a disqualifier per se.
Correct. And it's certainly not a go, no go decision. We would never use that tool as a true screener. That tool is more of a tool. Quite frankly, my organization has a lot of very, very technical people, engineers, operations leaders. We make stuff. So, their natural tendency is also not strong interpersonal and, communication and psychoanalyzing candidates. So it's more of a tool for them to think through things that they maybe wouldn't normally think through, to ask a candidate, to try to get deeper than what school did you go to? What class did you like? Those kinds of things.
Do you also think about using it for team construction and development?
We haven't done that yet, but I have used a similar tool in the past, and it was fascinating. I had it was my HR team, and I had two people who it was just constant conflict, and it was one of them who just never felt listened to and always felt belittled, and the other one who felt like that person had absolutely no moral compass and wasn't following the processes. And it turns out I had one, I can't remember the terminology that was used, but one of them was like a somebody who was just completely focused on details, and the other person was like a freewheeling, like, policies are just suggestions and not required. And it was more of it was just bridging that gap between the two of them, and ultimately trying to be the bridge between the two of them as the leader. But that was an interesting exercise, and we actually shared it as a group so that each individual saw how the other individual was kind of wired, so to speak. It was interesting. It was an interesting exercise.
There are some companies where they do this and everyone's information is public for that reason. If I have to go have a meeting with you, I can look up, okay, you tend to think this way, or preference for this type of style. That's good to know. And it's going to change how I'm going to engage with you in either that conversation or in our team collaboration.
Yeah, I toured a facility one time, and they had something like that, whatever the results were, posted right outside their office door, so they knew exactly what they were walking into. I love using those tools for development and growth. I use them a lot throughout the year. I've thought about it, bringing them into the interview process several times, because we hire sales associates, and it's real hard to determine, who's going to be good at sales in an interview. But the one thing that keeps me from not pulling the trigger is I just don't want to add another barrier to employment. And that's where I just keep personally getting stuck. But I agree. I support these tools. Absolutely.
Yeah. So shifting gears, in that context of, using a tool to be a little bit more maybe self-reflective as an HR practitioner or as a leader of people, I think one of the areas that we struggle with a lot is just, how do I do career development for my team? And especially when I haven't done it in the past. So what advice would you have for a professional who knows this is an opportunity, but really doesn't know where to start? How do you engage in this process with your team?
Unfortunately, no one really knows how to do this because it's another skill that has not been taught. And here's the really funny part. If any of us were to ever say to our manager, hey, this project you just put me on, we're going to work on it for 6 months. But listen, let's not bother with a budget or timeline or plan. Let's just wing it and see if we get there in 6 months. Right? That person will be thrown out on his ear. Right? We would never accept that for our work projects. But so many of us say, yeah, next 5 years of my career, I don't know, let's just wing it. Hopefully I'll wind up where I want to go. And we don't even bother making a plan. Now, of course, the catch with plans, the usual pushback is, well, you can't make a plan. It's never going to work out that way. Well, that 6-month project I worked on, of course, it never worked out as we planned, right? How often are you off on your budget or your timeline? It's the act of planning that is important. It's going through the process and understanding where are the pitfalls. So when something does come at you, you can adjust the plan and say, well, look, we're going to be a month late, or we can get it done now, but here's the trade-off. And we say, okay, now we understand the options before us. So creating career plans, we all have to do this. Now, it is the responsibility of every employee more than anyone else. Every individual needs to take responsibility for his or her plan. As HR professionals and managers, we should support them. Recognize that plans are going to extend beyond the company. Realistically, people are going to be at the company on average 4 or 5 years, but their career is much longer. Don't be afraid to have those discussions that, look, down the road they might not be there. Be honest and open about it. Understand where they want to go long term. Back through, what does that mean? If you want to be here in 20 years or 10 years, where do you need to be in 8 years, 5 years, 3, 2? And now as you get into that scope of the next 1, 2, maybe 4 years, what does that look like? Because that will most certainly be at the company, right? The certainty is at least higher. And recognize there are some things that will align to what you need in the company. We need you to develop these skills that will make you more effective. There will be some things that maybe aren't as relevant. They say, look, you don't need this, but knowing that this is important to you, okay, that's helpful. Maybe we're running a training program for other people with these skills, and it really doesn't cost much to have you sit in that as well. Or maybe we send you externally, and that's just part of the benefit. That's part of what keeps you occupied and motivated to stay here. So we have to take a holistic view and not just that narrow, what can you do that relates to the company today?
I personally am very passionate about self-development. So whenever I have an opportunity to learn or go to an event or grow in some way, I'll take it. But I also have some people on my team who just couldn't care less. How do I get them excited about growing these skills?
Some of that might be difficult. I had one employee who I inherited, and he would show up to work late, if at all. He was unfortunately in a critical path, so we couldn't just fire him. And I sat him down one day, and he said, yeah, look, I'm just not a motivated guy. I really don't get motivated about work or anything. And I appreciated that honesty, but it wasn't helpful to me, and there wasn't anything I could do to instill it in him. I just had to go find a replacement. I think he knew we were doing that. With other folks, I've gone in, I remember I joined a new company and I had to get the technology team to shift to go in an entirely new direction. Now, engineers in particular, we talk about herding cats because engineers are very intentional in what they like to do. And certainly in job markets like the current one, they know they have options. If I say go left and they don't want to go left, they say I'm going to go to this other company, they're going to let me go right. So you can't just order or dictate. But what you can do is understand their individual motivations. And this really happens at an individual level. What does this person find interesting? Where does this person want to go in his or her career? And how can you find that alignment? So in one case, there's a new technology I wanted them to learn. This particular engineer had no interest in that technology, but he had interest in a different one. I said, look, the one that I'm going to have you learn, it's going to get you 80% of the way to the one you want to learn. It's really similar. Don't just take my word for it. Ask around. And so I found a way to align my needs, the company's needs, to his, and that helped motivate him.
Yeah. And my last question, which is kind of an add-on on this, is what do you do when your leadership team is struggling to grasp the concept of developing these soft skills? It's hard to put a return on it, right? How do you create that ROI for them?
There is actually a measurable return if you think about it the right way. So let's take negotiations. This is the example I use to illustrate it because it's the most obvious. What I say to students in my book and other people I teach, imagine you get a job, you're 30 years old, you get a job for $70,000. And you decide, I've learned a little about negotiation, I want to negotiate this job. Okay, so I go and negotiate and I get a raise before I start. We go from 70 to 71,000. That's it. Right? We can all imagine that's not a huge lift. So this person just got $1,000 more. Took them 5 minutes. Now, if they do nothing else, if this person sits in that job for the next 30 some years of her career, what happens? She just earned $1,000 more for 30 years. She just earned $30,000 from one tiny, simple negotiation. Now, of course, we know that's not realistic. She's not going to sit in that job for the rest of her career. She'll have other raises, promotions, new jobs. And in fact, learning to negotiate a little bit better is going to earn her tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars in her career. Now, negotiations, when we teach this, money is never a great example because it's a zero-sum game and everyone thinks, yes, focus on the numbers. But it illustrates the concept so well. Right? A little bit of effort. This isn't some world-class negotiator, but that little bit of effort has this massive return because it's cumulative. It happens year after year, and it adds up. Now, of course, negotiations happen not just for salary. They actually happen every day in our office. Imagine if you could, if everyone in the office was a slightly better negotiator. It's not that they're all going to get $1,000 more when negotiating with a supplier or customer, but they're going to have better outcomes when they negotiate with each other as we do team projects. Now imagine your leadership. If everyone in your company was just 1% better about being a leader, again, not world-class, not leading a transition countrywide, just 1% better, but across the board, you won't see an immediate $1,000 return, but you're going to have that benefit. And so when you think about this concept in terms of leadership, communication, team building, you're going to recognize there is that same massive cumulative benefit across the organization. It just won't be immediately measurable in dollars.
I love that. And I run into that so many times. It's trying to quantify an ROI of an HR program or something related to human capital. It sometimes can be a really big challenge to articulate. So I loved that example, but I can hear some of my management team saying, but if they know how to negotiate, then they're going to want to negotiate everything. And now my job's going to get harder because they're going to, be able to, argue with me. So
they're going to ask for more money every year.
Yeah.
They're going to, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's a natural fear. If I go out and I develop all of my employees and they have all these great skills, now I've got a fear of them taking those skills elsewhere or using those skills against me. So how do you navigate that pushback?
Let's look at negotiation specifically and then the larger set of skills. Because negotiation, they think, right, if they all learn to get that $1,000 more, this just cost me $200,000 a year for my 200 employees. I don't want to do that. But of course, when we teach negotiations, good negotiators know it's not about just grabbing a bigger piece of the pie. It is about enlarging the pie. It's about coming up with better solutions that help everyone. And if you can do that, now, yes, everyone's going to get a slightly bigger piece, but if they are all expert negotiators, you're going to increase the pie so much more. They will be better when negotiating with your suppliers and with your customers and with your partners. They will be more effective at work. Those meetings will happen faster because they're not going to be arguing back and forth. You're not going to have the bitterness of, oh, you're such a pain to deal with, because we'll bring those negotiation skills to our conflict resolution. Here I'm using conflict broadly about how do we chop up this project and how do we assign your team's going to be responsible because I don't want to burden my team. When we bring these skills, we're all so much more effective, and that makes the pie so much bigger. Yes, it might cost you $200,000 more, but you'll be getting more customers, you'll be delivering faster. If all these aspects of your business are 1% better, who cares about that extra $200,000? That's going to be small compared to the outcome. When we think about these other skills, we have to recognize something like leadership. A good leader doesn't say, oh, you stood up and had a good idea. Sit down, shut up, don't steal the thunder from me, right? A good leader says, fantastic. I love that you contributed, because I, as a leader, can't think of all the solutions myself. It's great that we have more leaders on the team. When we are secure in our leadership, in our skill set, in the company and culture we created, creating these engaged, competent employees, they're going to want to stay there because they know their peers are competent and engaged. They're going to say, I am developing at this company. This is fantastic. I want to keep developing. They are less likely to leave. Now, in that first order effect, you think, oh, they're better, they're more marketable. But that second order effect of the whole company is better is what's going to keep them there. And so you have to look at the big picture.
Yeah, I always tell my leadership team, well, let's treat them well enough that we don't have to worry about that, because good leaders are hard to find. Good people, it's hard to find.
I can certainly say in technology, we all know every developer on our team, and they know this too, at any time they can say, I want a new job, and 48 hours later, they will have one, probably for more money.
Right.
Absolutely.
This is the world we're in. So we're not catching them by saying, I'm going to cut off your options, or I can't throw as much money at you as Google or Amazon does. We have to win them over through a good environment, a good workplace culture, a good challenge, and development. And that's how we win.
Yeah, that and engineers. Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate it. We got that's another podcast. We don't have enough time to start lamenting about the challenges of skilled technical recruiting and retention. But and I think the other point that I thought was very well made is that career planning goes a lot further than your individual company, and it really should, if it's done well. And I reflect on examples where helping somebody actually get into a career that they love, even if that's outside of your organization, can actually help your organizational culture, because now you don't have somebody who's doing something they really shouldn't be doing or don't want to be doing, and they're like miserable and dragging your morale down because they're like just 20 years later, and now they're depressed that they didn't go chase their dreams.
I had a company, I inherited a team, and there was one person on this team who just didn't align well with the values. He was a perfectionist. That can be a really good quality, but for the type of work we were doing, it held us back. We didn't need to be perfect in what we were doing, and we had better ROI being close to, but not perfect. And I saw the conflict he had with other engineers, the conflict he had with me and the decisions we were making. Talked to him about it a couple times and finally realized this was a values difference. And so that wasn't something that was going to change. He felt strongly about this. He had been at the company for 10 years. His cousin and best friend was his coworker. His brother was at the company and a leader there. So there were lots of potential challenges. But I sat him down and talked to him about why this conflict existed and said, this probably isn't the right fit for you. There are many companies that would be a good fit, right, where they do value perfection. I offered to introduce him to companies, to recruiters, to give him a good reference. I knew he wasn't going to sabotage the system, so I said, let's transition you over a number of months. And look, if you need more time, we can do that too. So he took a number of months, found a new job, and I remember his brother said to me, that is the nicest firing of someone I have ever seen. And everyone in the company knew I'm not just going to be some jerk and say, get out of here. I'm going to help you. I'm going to support you. And so if something's not a fit, they could turn to me and know I am going to protect them as individuals, even if it wasn't in the interest of the company. And that builds good teamwork, good management, good relationships that will serve you in the long run.
Maybe you should transition into HR.
I've usually been the de facto HR leader at most of my companies because at startups, we don't have anyone else.
You're everything.
Perfect.
You're HR whether you want to be or not, Mark.
Yes.
It's better than HR trying to be IT. That's awful.
I don't know that that's my wheelhouse. But Molly, I was an IT project manager for a few summers when I was a college student. So
I can see you do that. Not
I'm a
me.
nerd.
You
I'm
are.
sorry. That's where, yeah. All right. Great conversation, Mark. I wish we could keep going, but we are getting towards the end of our time, and I want to be mindful and respectful of your evening. So we're going to jump into the Rebel HR Flash Round. So Flash Round, question number 1. What are you reading right now?
I am just coming out of my hiatus where my reading list got backlogged because when I was working on the book, I didn't want to have myself too swayed by what I was reading. I just read Range by David Epstein, which was a wonderful book, and Deborah Tannen's Talking 9 to 5, both great books that HR professionals should read.
Perfect. All right, question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
A number of wonderful podcasts, and if you go to my website, that I'm sure we're about to talk about, you can see the different podcasts I've been on. Many are HR podcasts, leadership, communications, networking podcasts. So really great content across the many podcasts I've been fortunate to be on.
Perfect. All right. Softball question for you. You already teed it up for us. How can our listeners connect with you?
You can go to my website, thecareertoolkitbook.com. There you can learn more about the book, get in touch with me, or follow me on social media. You can also download the free app. It's available on Apple and Android. And so as you read the book, it helps to reinforce the skills, because I know when I read a book like this, I forget 5 minutes later. You can also go to the resources page, find other wonderful books I reference, other websites with free tools, and there are those downloads, including the one of how you can create this type of peer learning organization at your company for free. So you can download this, cross out my name, put your name at the top of it, and say, look at this great program. I just came up with it. You get to be the hero. That and everything else, it's free on the website, thecareertoolkitbook.com.
I love it. I guarantee you just got a couple hundred clicks on your website after giving that freebie out.
I'm doing it right now.
Molly's got it right now. She just printed it. There you go. That's great. Mark, sincerely appreciate the time here spent today. Really great content, and looking forward to picking up a copy of the book, The Career Toolkit. And I'm assuming that it's available anywhere books are sold. So check it out. Great content today. Really appreciate it. And I know this is something I deal with daily in my organization. I'm sure that this was helpful for all of our listeners. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to your listeners for your time.
Thanks, Mark. All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.